So, my name is Dustin Thompson. I'm the chapter director for the Sierra Club Delaware chapter, and I really want to thank all the attendees joining in. Got still folks coming in, but thank you so much for jumping on tonight. We look forward to having a pretty robust conversation around the Advanced Clean Cars program that we're currently talking about adopting here in Delaware. But first, we're going to do some introductions with our panelists here. So as I call you, if you wouldn't mind 3 to 5 minutes or so, tell folks about yourself and what area of this issue that you deal with more directly. So Alan, Dr. Allen.
Yeah, thanks for everybody to be here this evening and your interest in the topic. Most recently, I was a health system executive at Christiana Care, and prior to that, for 20 plus years, I was a primary care internal medicine physician. And so I'm coming at this question from the point of view of health, human health. As a primary care physician, I took care of several thousand people with asthma attacks, chronic lung disease, heart disease, and other medical conditions by prescribing multiple medications. When people were sick, I often was able to get them feeling better for at least a period of time. But these were diseases that are sometimes caused by and often made worse by air pollution. And without fixing those problems, those people keep getting sick. And fortunately, now we have ways to clean up the air we breathe. And we know that means we can have better health throughout our population. The two main pollutants that harm health are soot, which scientists call particulate matter, and smog, which is called ground level ozone. Worldwide, the main causes of soot and smog are burning coal and oil and natural gas in power plants to produce electricity, and also from cars and buses and trucks. In Delaware, it turns out that the biggest share of the problem comes from those vehicles, the things which are on our roads locally and that travel our highways through the state. We know that smog inflames the lungs and can cause wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath. Soot is a direct irritant to the lungs and also passes through the lungs into the bloodstream and is from there carried to the heart, brain, kidneys, pancreas, and even to the placentas of pregnant women. It's been implicated in causing or worsening angina, dementia, learning disorders, diabetes, and even pregnancy complications. We even know that the higher the level of soot in the air, the greater the chance that someone with COVID would die from that disease. In the United States, that came out to be about 18% increased likelihood of death related to the amount of soot in the air that people breathe. Overall, that meant nationally over 200,000 people died because of excessive particulates, people who could have survived if our air were cleaner, if cars, buses, trucks, and power plants didn't pollute the air. Even beyond COVID, 4% of higher income white Americans and 7% of white lower income Americans and 7% of Black Americans of any income level die prematurely each year due to air pollution. So that's a big impact upon our neighbors, our families, our parents, our friends. Delaware does not have clean air and does not have healthy air. And it will get worse, especially smog will get worse as the climate gets warmer. The hotter the air, the more that things that come out of the tailpipes of vehicles is turned into nitrogen oxides, which are the main components of smog. The American Lung Association most recently graded Newcastle County with an F for smog. That's a failing grade. Sussex received a C and Kent a B. In Newcastle County, there are at least 11 days a year when the air is unhealthy for anyone with asthma, lung disease, heart disease, who work outdoors or is older. And in Delaware, 15,000 children have asthma, 77,000 adults have asthma, 70,000 adults have heart disease. So there are a whole lot of people, and that doesn't count the people who are 65 and older who are also at risk, which also comes to, let me look at my notes, another 180,000 people over the age of 65. That comes to a whole lot of people who are at increased risk for health problems, premature death, needing doctors, needing medication because of air quality. There is good news, and that is that by cleaning up our air pollution, the health risks decrease almost immediately. The climate warming from carbon emissions is mostly related to global pollution. So it's going to stay warm for some time, no matter what we do here in Delaware. However, smog and soot are mostly produced by regional power plants and by the vehicles on our own roads. It's been shown that electric vehicles quickly result in cleaner air. That means fewer asthma attacks, fewer days of school and work missed, less need for medications, fewer doctor visits, emergency room visits, fewer hospitalizations. In fact, the magnitude of the damage from air pollution is about the same as that of health problems from smoking. Just as those problems have lessened as smoking has dropped from 45% to less than 20% of adults in the country, so will health problems from pollution fall. And once again, there's good data that where electric vehicles and other ways of decreasing air pollution have improved our air quality, that there are fewer sick people, fewer missed days of work, and less cost for healthcare. There are plenty of other statistics we can share, but what's most important is knowing that it is not just a financial cost, but also a human cost to breathing polluted air. And Delaware does not have clean air, and most of that is because of fossil fuel power plants, and most especially the vehicles on our roads. And that with the encouragement of zero emission vehicles through ACC2, we can quickly bring better air quality and better health to tens of thousands of our neighbors in Delaware. And just to let you know, it's just not me speaking about this. The American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American Association of Pediatrics, the American Association of Family Physicians, and the American Public Health Association have all come forward, as well as the Lung Association, have come forward to say that air quality is a problem to the health of Americans. It's going to get worse, and we need to take action now to start cleaning the air, not in 5 or 10 or 15 years. So thanks, and I'll be available to answer questions, and we'll pass it back to Dustin.
Thanks, Dr. Greenglass. Professor Willett Kempton.
Hello, I'm Willett Kempton. I am at the University of Delaware, and I do research on different kinds of energy systems, including offshore wind and electric vehicles. So I'm here to answer questions, but just a brief background. I've been working on electric vehicles, doing research since got a 19 in front of the year, 1998, and have been 100%, my household's been 100% electric vehicles since something like 2012 or so. But on the research side, we have been generally sort of trying to understand design and communication between the car and the charging station, which is very important. It's a very poorly developed area right now. And so we are developing a standard through the Society for Automotive Engineers for communication between the car and the charging station. And then we will have a parallel standard in Europe with colleagues there. So that's sort of a major R&D push, and it's kind of weird that nobody else has come up with a standard that has these capabilities, but it seems like we're the ones who are doing it. So we'll see if that gets adopted. And then we have the primary thing that we're known for in our group at the University of Delaware with electric vehicles is using electric vehicles and their battery for storage for the grid. So right now, the storage is really valuable to the grid. When a big power plant fails or a transmission line goes down, you can have a bunch of really big batteries, like in semi-tractor trailers, or you can have 1,000 or 10,000 littler batteries in cars, as long as they're communicating and connected by computers and so forth, and they act like a big power plant or a big battery. So that it's kind of an easy idea, but it turns out to be complicated to adopt. So we spend half of our time bending wires and writing computer code, and the other half of our time filing petitions to FERC and PJM, and sometimes the Delaware legislature is really nice and helps get a bill passed that makes something work better. So we work at all levels of government. Just a quick introduction of my background. That's it. Pass it back to Dustin.
Thank you very much. Representative Phillips.
Hi, everyone. I'm Representative Sophie Phillips. I represent the 18th District, so the Christiana Mall area, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the House. I'm going to talk a little bit about electric vehicle related incentives, both federally and in Delaware. So there are first three types of electric vehicles: battery, plug-in hybrids, and fuel cell. It's important to know for these incentives. For federal incentives, there is the tax credit for new EV purchases. So if you're purchasing a new EV of any type, a consumer can receive up to $7,500 off of their federal income taxes. The credit is non-refundable, so a consumer can't get back more on the credit than they owed in taxes. The consumer also can't apply any excess credit for future tax years. There are some requirements for this. The consumer adjusted gross income must be below $150,000 for a single family household, or under $300,000 for a married household. Vehicle manufacturer's suggested retail price must be below $80,000 for SUVs, vans, and trucks, and under $55,000 for all others. And the vehicle must undergo final assembly in North America. Starting this week, there will also be requirements on EVs to have battery materials sourced and or assembled in North America or a country with which the U.S. has a free trade agreement. For the next incentive, it's important to note that 80% of new battery EVs are leased and 55% of plug-in hybrids are leased. So there is the tax credit for new EV leases. So when you're leasing out a new EV of any of the three types, a lender usually affiliated with the manufacturer can claim the commercial tax credit of up to $7,500 off of their federal business taxes. The lender can then apply the $7,500 as a capitalized cost reduction, similar to a down payment towards the lease of a vehicle. This can reduce the monthly lease payments for the consumer. There are no requirements for this, but usually only certain manufacturers or affiliated lenders offer this. Next, around 75% of the U.S. light vehicle sales are used vehicles, which sets up the next incentive nicely. So this incentive is the tax credit for used EV purchases. So if you are purchasing a used EV of any of the types, consumers can receive up to 30% of the sales price, capped at $4,000, off of their federal income taxes. The credit is non-refundable, so a consumer can't get back more on the credit than owed in taxes. Consumer also can apply any excess credit to future tax years. There are requirements for this too. The consumer adjusted gross income must be below $75,000 for a single family household or $150,000 for a married household. The vehicle must be purchased from a dealer. It must have a model year 2 years prior to the current calendar year, and the vehicle must have a sale price of $25,000 or less, and they must wait 3 years between claims. Lastly, for the federal incentives, we have tax credits for EV charging stations. 80 to 90% of charging is estimated to be done overnight at home or during the day at work. So for the tax credit for EV charging stations, if you are installing EV charging stations, consumers or businesses can receive up to 30% of project expenses, excluding permitting and inspection fees, off of their federal income or business taxes. The requirements for these are you can only get this credit if the charging station is installed in a census tract that is not an urban area and where the poverty rate is at least 20% or where the median family income is less than 80% of the state median family income level. Business projects must meet wage and apprenticeship requirements, or they can only receive a 6% tax credits. So now for Delaware incentives, there's a rebate for new EV purchases and leases. If you're purchasing or leasing a new battery electric vehicle, Delaware residents or businesses can receive up to a $2,500 cash rebate. A $1,000 cash rebate is available for the purchase or lease of a new plug-in hybrid EV. The rebate may be considered taxable income by the U.S. IRS and the Delaware Department of Revenue. The requirements for this, the rebate must be applied for within 90 days of the purchase or lease. The vehicle price, including features and equipment, cannot exceed $60,000, and the lease terms must be no less than 36 months or 3 years. There's a rebate for EV charging stations. So if you're installing an EV charging station, Delaware businesses, nonprofits, or governmental organizations can receive up to a $3,500 cash rebate per port. The rebate may be considered taxable income by the U.S. IRS and the Delaware Department of Revenue. There are requirements for this as well. The rebate must be applied for within 90 days of a purchase. The charging station must be classified as a level 2 alternating current charger, and the charging station must be a very specific connector. And the rebate amount is determined using a table that you can find on the DENREC website. Starting May 1st, 2023, the state of Delaware will be updating the cash rebate programs for both new EV purchases and leases and for EV charging stations. So we are currently working on codifying the rebate for new EV purchases and leases and the rebate for EV charging stations that DENREC currently has. But we would also like to include the used vehicles going forward, similar to the federal used EV incentive program is what we're hopefully going for. So those are currently in progress, and I look forward to having those introduced this year. I know that was a ton of information very quickly, so thank you very much, and I can try to answer questions at the end. Thanks.
Thanks, Representative Phillips. So one more introduction. So we're doing intros right now, and then I'm going to kind of give an agenda and overview for folks, and then we'll do a short presentation and then get into the questions and answers. But last up for the introductions, Representative Lambert.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Representative Larry Lambert. I represent the wonderful 7th House District, which is on Delaware's northern border. It includes Claymont, the Ardens, Gwynhurst, and a little bit of Brandywine Hundred. I'm here because I want to make sure that we bring along all of our impacted environmental justice communities. I serve with Representative Sophie Phillips on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the House. I'm co-chair of Delaware's Justice 40 Oversight Committee, ensuring that at least 40% of investment benefits around green energy, climate change, sea level rise, et cetera, go to our overburdened communities that have been disproportionately impacted by poverty, pollution, and a history of redlining, et cetera. For me, I want to reach out to our Delawareans, provide a warm welcome to this event. You've heard a lot of information, a lot of dense academic jargon. We want to make sure that you have access to this information in a way that you can digest. We want to thank the individuals that have spoken already and thank the Sierra Club because they will have a landing page that they're developing now so that you can have access to all of this information. We want to make sure that when you hear this information, that it doesn't function as a barrier separating you from this. We want to make sure that you can keep up and that you know that this environmental justice space is a space for you as well. We look forward to getting you clean information about the Advanced Cards 2 program. There is a lot of information, and even if you can't keep up with everything, that makes you just like me. There's a lot going on. We look forward to a lively presentation today. For you to get more information, always feel free to reach out to us separately. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Representative Lambert. And so sorry, Angela. I didn't intentionally forget about you, but it did happen. So sorry about that. Angela, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of context of where the reg is at right now, that would be great.
Thanks, Dustin. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to come out tonight and learn about this rulemaking. I'm Angela Marconi. I am the Air Quality Division Director for the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. And thanks to Dustin for inviting me to give you guys an update tonight on where we are with the Advanced Clean Car 2 rulemaking, and to Sierra Club and NRDC for hosting this event. So DNREC understands that there's a lot of interest and concern about the Advanced Clean Car 2 regulation. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background about our rulemaking process and some history about this regulation. So Delaware adopted 2 parts of the Advanced Clean Car 1 regulation in 2013. At that time, Delaware chose not to accept the zero emission vehicle piece because we didn't think that the technology around zero emission vehicles was to a point where it made sense for the state at that time. A lot has changed since then. So now DNREC is going through the rulemaking process for Advanced Clean Car 2, and we are considering adoption of the zero emission vehicle program as a part of that rulemaking. So that would add the zero emission vehicle piece into the low emission vehicle and the greenhouse gas standards that we adopted years ago and update them for future model years. So far, DNREC has hosted 2 stakeholder meetings and 5 public workshops to discuss what the regulation includes and the benefits to Delaware's air quality that would be realized if we adopted the regulation. We've received over 600 comments at this point, and we truly appreciate all of the time and effort people have taken into writing comments and engaging with us throughout this process. There will be a public hearing on this matter. There's been some confusing reporting around this issue. So I want to be clear, we have not had the public hearing yet. We will hold a public hearing on this matter on April 26th. And there will be additional opportunity to comment as a part of that. You could comment in writing throughout the comment period, which is open now, or verbally at the hearing. I think the link to the hearing page will be shared later during this meeting, and that website has directions for how to submit comments officially. I think that this conversation we're having tonight is really important, but this is not an official forum for DNREC to receive comments. So there will be additional information about that later. If we adopt the regulation this year, the regulation would take effect for model year 2027 and would require 43% of new passenger vehicles delivered for sale in the state of Delaware to be zero emission vehicles. The percentage increases annually up to 100% for model year 2035. And another thing that I wanted to say is just that the regulation is not technology specific, but most car manufacturers are focusing on electric vehicles at this time. And I think you've probably already kind of gleaned that from some of the intros that the other speakers have given. So thank you for having me. And I'll pass it back to Justin.
Thank you. All right. So Kathy Harris from the NRDC is going to be speaking during part of the presentation we're getting ready to jump into. So once she gets to her role, she'll take a minute to introduce herself as well. But we're going to go ahead and get into it. All right. Panelists seeing my screen okay? All right, great. So thanks again for everybody joining tonight on the webinar. We are going to record this. We've had a lot of interest, but some folks that obviously have conflicts because that's life. So we want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to get this information. So this is kind of the agenda for today, or tonight rather. So we're going to go through a brief history, some of which you've heard. So a little bit of repeat information possibly in there, but a history on the clean cars movement here in Delaware. We're going to go through what the benefits of adopting the Advanced Clean Cars program would be for Delaware and nationally and regionally. We're going to talk in pretty specific detail about what the program is, what it does not do, what are the impacts of it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the market's doing right now in terms of the automakers transitioning to electric vehicles. And of course, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. Now, I want to state kind of on the outset, we're working off of 3 pretty basic fundamental assumptions here throughout this presentation and what you're going to be hearing about. We're in our questions, we're not going to get into a debate or back and forth on some of these assumptions. We're not here to convince you that climate change is real tonight. If you don't think that climate change is real, that's your prerogative, but we're not here to debate that. So the three assumptions are climate change is real and it's having impacts. Air pollution is a problem in Delaware and indeed in the region, and that automakers are and will continue to transition to a 100% electric fleet. So with those things in mind, we have a choice to make as a state. We can adopt clean car standards that's going to reduce pollution coming from new cars, or we can revert to federal standards and weaken our progress towards reducing pollution. We've made a lot of progress, but certainly going back to the federal standards will set some of that back. We can either help grow the market for cleaner vehicles in Delaware or continue to allow that market to bypass our state, which is what we've seen over the past 5 to 10 years. Sorry, I've been working too long and my second screen just decided to shut down. There we go. So we can gradually phase in zero emission vehicles into the fleet, allowing time for planning and infrastructure development, or we can play catch up after the transition takes place, which will cause a lot of difficulties and planning and a continued lack of access to these vehicles. We can either guarantee that the more and more affordable EVs and plug-in hybrids that are coming online currently, and Volkswagen, for example, just announced their intent to make an EV for everybody, very similar to what they had as a mission for their Jetta and Golf. Or we continue to force car buyers in Delaware to make their purchases out of state if they want those cleaner options. And of course, we can either take action to improve this air quality and health issues that Dr. Greenglass was talking about earlier, or we can continue to allow that air pollution to harm our state's most vulnerable citizens, because it disproportionately impacts the elderly and the youngest. So I am the chapter director for the Delaware chapter here. I work on clean energy issues and clean transportation issues. The chapter does a lot of work in Delaware, but tonight we're here to talk about ACC2 in particular. So Delaware signed on back in 2013 to just the low emission vehicle standards. But in 2020 and 2021, when we were developing the climate action plan, there was a recommendation in that plan that Delaware sign on to the full complement rather than just the low emission vehicle standards. Governor Carney made the announcement that Delaware is intending to do so March 3rd of 2022, and DENREC began an outreach process starting in October of last year with those public workshops. So essentially we have three options. We can follow many other states, and those are both Democrat and Republican controlled states that are doing this, to update the regulations to the full Advanced Clean Cars 2 package, ACC2. So if you hear me say ACC or one of the speakers say ACC, that's Advanced Clean Cars. That's the program we're talking about. We can update only the LEV regulations, which would just increase regulation on gas cars. Or we can revert back to weaker federal standards. But if we do revert back, there will have to be additional steps taken to continue air pollution reduction in Delaware. As I said, we are coming in with the assumption that climate change is real and that humans are a significant causer of that problem. And so when you're looking at our greenhouse gas emissions in Delaware, the largest chunk of the pie is from transportation. And the majority of that transportation emissions are from passenger fleet vehicles. So in Delaware, somebody asked earlier what the stats were for asthma. So Delaware has over 15,000 children with asthma and 85,000 adults with asthma. This stat on the right side of your screen is actually from the American Lung Association, when they did modeling to figure out what would be the benefit if we transition to an electric vehicle fleet under the guidelines of these rules, with the assumption that even still at 2035, there will be a significant number of gas cars on the road, which we'll get to in a little bit. And these were the numbers they came up with. Now, this is, of course, predicated on that we continue to help clean our electricity supply as well, which we are certainly making a lot of progress on, but we have to continue doing that to realize the full benefit of this program. But in Delaware, 57% of people are living in places that have failing grades for unhealthy levels of air pollution, more than half of folks in our state. But that doesn't impact everybody equally. It's often impacting the most vulnerable populations the most, and particularly overburdened and under-resourced communities. Adopting this program obviously will have a significant impact on our state's ability to address climate change, given that it is the largest portion of our state's emissions. And of course, folks have probably heard this stat to death, but it is cheaper to refuel, quote, refuel an electric vehicle than it is a gas car. And with only 18 moving parts in the drivetrain rather than the over 2,000 that is in a internal combustion engine, they're also significantly cheaper to maintain as well. Kathy, you want to take over here and just let me know when you want to advance the slide?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for hopping on this webinar to discuss this super important program. My name is Kathy Harris. I am the Clean Cars Lead for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. So I've been working in states around the country on the adoption of these regulations. So I'm going to kind of take us to a higher level for a minute and talk more about exactly what this regulation does and what it doesn't do. I also always like to put a plug in there that I am a born and raised Delawarean. I grew up in Wilmington, went to the charter school of Wilmington myself. So it's always so wonderful to be on calls with my Delaware crew again. So it's great to see everyone. So again, taking a step back, under the Federal Clean Air Act, California is allowed to set more stringent standards on vehicle emissions than the federal government. And under this regulation, under the Clean Air Act, other states are allowed to adopt California's rules or have the choice to follow the less stringent federal standards. So 18 states actually, including California, have adopted at least a portion of the Advanced Clean Cars 1 program, which is the predecessor to this Advanced Clean Cars 2 program that we're going to be talking about today. And as Dustin mentioned, Delaware has actually already adopted part of that program, the low emission vehicle standards portion of this policy. So what the regulation does that we're talking about today is it builds off of that previous regulation and strengthens not only the low emission vehicle standards, but also includes some zero emission vehicle targets. So states now have the choice to adopt the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, or as Dustin mentioned, just stick with the federal regulation. And states would have the option to adopt or not adopt any future changes to the program as well. Next slide, please, Dustin. So this has been reiterated a little bit already, but just to kind of, again, highlight the three components that are part of the Clean Cars program. We have the low emission vehicle standards for criteria pollutants, the low emission vehicle standards for greenhouse gas emissions, which Delaware has adopted and goes through vehicle model year 2025. And then there's the zero emission vehicle program, which requires manufacturers to sell an increasing number of zero emission vehicles. And I should reiterate that that is new zero emission vehicles. And that includes battery electric vehicles like the Chevy Bolt is a good example. Sorry, I blanked on an electric vehicle for a second. The Chevy Bolt is a good example, or a plug-in hybrid, which includes an has an electric battery, but also includes a small gasoline engine. And that's like the Prius Prime vehicle is a plug-in hybrid. And then also hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles are all eligible vehicles under this regulation. And to reiterate, in addition to this being a regulation only on new vehicle purchase or vehicle sales, it's also a requirement on the manufacturers themselves. This is by no means a requirement on Delaware or Delaware drivers. The point of regulation is at the manufacturer level. Next slide, please. So with that all being said, this is on paper what the regulation does. It was adopted by California in August of 2022, which now allows other states to be able to adopt that program starting in model year 2026. But as Angela said, since Delaware would hopefully be adopting the regulation this year, because of lead time requirements to give auto manufacturers enough notice about these regulations, 2 years is required to give that lead time for manufacturers. So Delaware would be starting the program in model year 2027. And as Angela said, that is about a 43% requirement of new vehicle sales, increasing to 100% new vehicle sales by 2035. If you go to the next slide, though, I want to reiterate that in the regulation itself, there are actually a lot of different flexibilities that will help for manufacturers to achieve these compliance levels. So as I said, we have on paper 43%, but this graph here just reiterates, this is not a Delaware example specifically, but just an assumptions on potential usage of these flexibilities in a state that would be adopting the regulation for model year 2027. And just for folks who might not know, vehicle model year tends to be a year ahead of calendar year. So when we talk about model year 2027, we're really talking about around calendar year 2026. There's a little bit of overlap, but the calendar year is slightly different than the model year. But these flexibilities include a variety of things, including incentives for manufacturers to start earning credits a couple of years prior to the start of the program to help fill these buckets, utilizing some of the credits from the first iteration of the program. And also, really importantly, there's an environmental justice credit component, which helps to increase the number of vehicles being placed in some of those communities that Representative Lambert mentioned, the ones that have been historically disproportionately overburdened with the transportation pollution. So with all of these different flexibilities in place, and happy to provide more information on the wonkiness of those later, but really what we're looking at is more like in the 20% requirement for, oh, sorry, Dustin, if you could, thank you. For model year 2027, we're not necessarily going to have the 43% requirement, but it's likely going to be more around, 25, 26% based off of just projections. But the important part to notice is that it will be much lower than the 43%. And when we consider business as usual sales of electric vehicle or zero emission vehicles to begin with, this jump is not nearly as scary as it might seem as we first hear. If you go to the next slide. I also just wanted to take a moment to highlight the fact, again, that this is a regulation on new vehicle sales. And we know for a fact that most drivers, and especially in Delaware as well, including nationally, buy their vehicles used. And so because this is a regulation only on new vehicle sales, we know that the vehicles that are currently on the road are going to continue to be on the road for a significant amount of time. So if we want to make sure that we are helping to fully decarbonize our transportation sector and move towards a transition to a zero emission vehicle future, the sooner that we can start ensuring that there are new clean vehicles on the road, the sooner that those vehicles will be able to enter the secondary market and provide significant cost saving benefits and all of the other benefits of zero emission vehicles to drivers who are purchasing their vehicles in the secondary market, and also helping to transition the fleet sooner rather than later so that we can guarantee and maximize the benefits that Delaware could achieve through the adoption of clean car programs. And then I think I'm turning it back to you after this, Dustin, to talk a little bit more about the history and background about this regulation in Delaware.
Great. Yep. Thank you. So just a little bit of additional background that Delaware has already began to see a sharp increase in interest and in purchasing of EVs. So you saw in 2018, we went from 366 to 2021, we had over 1,512 new vehicle registrations that were fully electric. This number is expected to continue to increase. However, the interest is not matching up with the supply. And this is because automakers prioritize almost to exclusion the states that are a part of this program. And that's why you can't go to your local dealer and test drive one of these EVs, particularly the more affordable ones that are often directly shipped to the states that have agreed to be a part of this program. So that ends up with most of the people buying these EVs, either buying them online through a company like Tesla, or going to another state or having them shipped into state, which you actually have to pay more money to have a car shipped into state from another state. So for example, I had to drive almost to New York, northern New Jersey, in order to purchase I have a Nissan Leaf, one of the more affordable options. And I was not able to get that at any dealership in Delaware, but I was able to get it pretty quickly, even with the crunch of the supply chain during the pandemic. I was still able to get it relatively quickly compared to folks even buying gas cars, because there was a shortage of all new vehicles during the pandemic due to manufacturing issues. The other issue that we're not seeing is that rebates are not necessarily keeping the pace with the need in the state. Part of that is because in order to qualify for the state's rebate at the point of sale, you have to buy the car in the state of Delaware. You can buy out of state, like I did in New Jersey, right? And then go through a process online. Denrec made a lovely YouTube video that makes it pretty easy, but it's still, you have to put that down. You have to pay that up front, and you're basically reimbursing yourself. Whereas if we had these vehicles in Delaware and we were meeting that need and that demand, you would actually be able to use that point of sale rebate at the dealership. So a significant difference for folks, particularly LMI, low moderate income communities. A lot of folks ask about infrastructure. So this is a good map to see kind of where our infrastructure is currently and where it's being built. All these smaller green dots are level 2, public level 2 chargers. The larger yellow dots are the rapid chargers that are slated to come online in the next roughly year and a half now. So we submitted our EV infrastructure plan. It's called the NEVI plan, NEVI. You can look that up online. Denrec has a whole landing page about it. And that's going to expand our charging network to include another 25 rapid chargers on top of what we already have in the state. And these rapid chargers are going along the main transit corridors in the state, and also being installed in areas with a focus on those who do not have access to driveways or other places they would be able to install a level 2 charger at this point. So the NEVI plan that we have has chargers being specifically placed around those areas of convenience in those communities. So for example, like the ShopRite or a local other local grocery store or something to their effect, or a local gas station. So not in the community, like in the neighborhood, but within a reasonable distance of communities that tend to have a lower access to level 2 charging. Denrec also just announced, in addition to that 25 rapid chargers that we sent in and got approved for through the federal government, they have just approved an additional 14 rapid charging stations that were announced this year. Now, one thing to note, charging stations does not equal chargers. So most of the time, charging stations have multiple chargers, right? Multiple ports, usually 3 to 4. And so when you see 25 and 14, multiply that out by 3 or 4, that's how many plugs. And this is just within the next 2 years. There's ongoing infrastructure planning around electric vehicles, but that planning is much easier done when you know whether or not you're going to be a part of this program and be prioritizing that transition. So these are the states that Kathy mentioned earlier that in blue have adopted the ACC1 previously. You can see Pennsylvania and Delaware were the only 2 states that only adopted the low emission vehicle standard portion of the Advanced Clean Cars 1. The states with the green cars in them are states that have already adopted or are working on adopting the full ACC2. And here you can see that list in a little bit more of a larger visual for you. So all these states you see around us here, you got Virginia, New Jersey, Maryland, have all either already adopted or in the process of adopting this program as well. And that's what I meant when I said this is not just a red or blue. This is happening in states of all varieties. Now, one of the big things that we really want to stress tonight is that this transition is happening. This is not a question anymore if vehicles of the future will be electric. They will be electric. That question has been answered. And it's very apparent that it's been answered if you look at the investments that automakers are making within the next 10 years, sometimes even 5 years, depending on who you're talking about, in terms of investing in their manufacturing processes and battery processes for these cars. And so you can see on this slide just how much money these folks are investing. It's over $1 trillion between now and 2030 that these automakers are investing into this market. And they're doing that for a few different reasons. There is a world movement to help cut carbon emissions and other air pollutants that come predominantly from vehicle tailpipes. But there is also the fact that these cars are much cheaper to make after that initial investment has been made. Multiple car manufacturers have stated how surprised they are and how much easier it is to actually manufacture these cars, which makes sense, again, when you're going from over 2,000 moving parts that have to be installed down to 18 for the drivetrain of the vehicle. So that's a significant decrease in savings for them in terms of manufacturing costs. Coupling that with the fact that battery costs have come down by 90% in the past 10 years, it is not a wonder why these car makers are making this transition. So this, I think, is really puts a point on the transition that we're seeing. So this on the right-hand side is called is the S curve of technological advancement, right? So most technology advancement follows this kind of elongated S curve, starting at very low proliferation rates. So you could think of this also, the internet did the same thing, where it was very low, a number of people that had the internet in the beginning, and then it's really started to creep up. And then once you get into this steep incline, there's actually no turning back. The technology will proliferate the market. And so as you see on this diagram, this is the sale of battery electric vehicles only. So we're not including the plug-in hybrids in this. And then the sale of fossil fuel gas cars being made as well. And you can see as the S curve grows on the electric vehicle, it comes down on the fossil fuel vehicles. And this is clear when you actually look into what GM and other car manufacturers are doing, when they're saying very clearly, we are going to stop making new models and eventually stop making the vehicles entirely when it comes to internal combustion engine powered cars or gas powered cars. So it's important to note that where we are on this S curve, we are going right into the steepest part of that climb when there's really not a turning back point. So the issue is not whether or not electrification of the vehicle fleet should happen. The issue is not really whether or not Delaware wants those, EVs here. EVs are coming into the United States and worldwide. So really the question is, if we have to solve all of these issues anyway, it's about timing. So we have kind of two choices, I said in the beginning. Either we can recognize where we're at in this moment, that electrification is happening, and we can start planning and being prepared to do a managed transition into that. Or we can wait until that transition has happened all around us, but not here in Delaware, and then try to play catch up. Then we'll have to do more planning and more infrastructure development on the fly, which is not the way you want to do this. You want a managed transition, and that's what this program can provide. So we're going to kind of pause there and start digging into questions. If you have not yet, please use the Q&A function to ask questions. I know we've got a few that we're going to answer already, but if you have not yet been able to put your question in, I do encourage you to do so, since that is really what we want to be here to do tonight, is to be able to answer your questions. As Angela said in the beginning, April 26th is the public hearing on this. The comment period will run until May 26th, but you can start submitting written comments now. And this is the landing page for the public hearing. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and we can start digging into some of these questions.
Hey, everyone. I am going to share a couple questions with the panelists and invite them to answer if these are in their wheelhouse. So thanks so much for the questions. And please drop more into the Q&A section and we'll get to them as quick as we can. And the first question I want to pose to the panel is a question about the plug-in hybrid sort of exception, the percentage of plug-in hybrids that are accounted for and allowed for in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 standards. And I wanted to see if anyone could answer the question about how and why a plug-in hybrid is qualifying as a quote zero emission vehicle in the ACC 2 standards. So that's the first one. I'll give you all a moment to take that, whoever wants to jump in.
I can take an initial stab at that, Molly. So plug-in hybrids, as I noted, do have a small gasoline engine as well, but they are able to run fully on electric for a certain set mileage. Under the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation, there's actually some requirements for automakers to make sure that mileage is a sufficient amount. I think it may be 50 miles. I'd have to check the regulation that can run fully on electric. So it can still allow for folks to, drive a decent amount on that fully electric engine, but then battery, but then the gasoline engine would kick in to help extend range and allow the vehicle to travel further. So I'm honestly not sure 100% the rhyme or reason why that is included, but in the regulation, but it's what's been included under the California regulations. And since states have to adopt the regulation identically to California, plug-in hybrids would be eligible under this regulation in Delaware as well.
Yeah, so that brings up a good point. Just to add on a quick note, I'm not sure if we exactly said it or not, but it's come up several times that folks would rather Delaware write their own regulations around tailpipe pollution. So want to make it very clear that that is not allowed. There's a special process that California gets to take a part in because of the way the Clean Air Act is written, which means they can write their regulations and states can follow them exactly, but they cannot write their own regulations outside of California. So it's an option that's come up, but it's not a real option.
Thanks, Dustin. I have another question that I do think there are one or two qualified people on this panel can answer. And the question goes to battery manufacturing and how there are some arguments out there about battery manufacturing and the building of electric vehicles, particularly the batteries and the mining that goes into it, are harmful to the environment, or as harmful or to the environment as tailpipe emissions are. So I'm wondering if folks could, if I'm actually kind of looking at you, Dr. Kempton, to address that first. And then if there's anyone else who wants to respond to that as well. I think it's an important question and a lot of unknowns in the general public about battery manufacturing and mining that goes into it.
Well, mining definitely has environmental impacts, and battery manufacturing, it's a heavy component of the vehicle. So there's, a lot of manufacturing involved. So those do have environmental impacts. But there have been some very good studies by national labs and by some university research groups. Is the impact of battery manufacturing or the overall electric vehicle manufacturing, is that so much that it dilutes or removes the advantage of an electric vehicle, which obviously has no tailpipe emissions when it's running? But again, it does have some emissions maybe at the power plant, that's providing that. So the answer is no, it doesn't nearly nullify it. The savings in emissions are much greater than the other two combined. We could go more into the detail of why that is, but it does vary a bit. If you're driving an electric vehicle in Wyoming, where it's essentially 100% coal electricity versus Delaware, where it's more of a mix with more natural gas, some nuclear, which has no air pollution, of course. or in Bonneville Power area, 100% hydro. And there's some variation there, but the electric vehicles with today's power system and today's battery manufacturing are much cleaner over their life cycle. That's a very clear conclusion from multiple studies.
Yeah.
And if I,
No,
I'm sorry, Dustin, if I can build off of that too, as Representative Phillips mentioned in her introductory remarks, there have actually been a lot of thought about this from the federal government under the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's some new incentives coming online to help to incentivize battery manufacturing here in the United States to help what we call onshore some of that production. So we're helping to kind of keep some of that momentum here in the US. But I'll also reiterate too that in addition to trying to onshore the manufacturing and reducing the amount of minerals that we need through different battery technologies as well, there's also been a lot of incentives and a lot of conversations about battery recycling too, to help to ensure that we don't necessarily need to extract as many minerals to achieve the number of electric vehicles that we need. So the Inflation Reduction Act is an amazing initial start for that. But just wanted to reiterate that the recycling and the battery technology is another opportunity to help to reduce the amount of mining necessary to accelerate the transition to EVs.
Yeah, I was going to add something similar. It's probably one of the more important parts of the Inflation Reduction Act is the requirements around these cars. There's been a lot of concern around human rights issues in the Congo. I will say that most of those issues around cobalt, most car manufacturers are phasing out the use of cobalt for that and other reasons. But really bringing the industry back to the United States, the auto manufacturing industry and the components thereof, is possibly one of the most important things that we're doing right now. Not just because of the jobs are great, they're very important, but also because we can take care of, through regulations and the laws that we have in this country, we can take care of the workers and the lands and the spaces that we're going to be using to produce these vehicles. You don't see the same level of care in some other states, some other countries, as you do in the United States when it comes to air pollution issues, when it comes to human rights and workers' rights. So it's can't really be overstated how important it is that we do bring these processes back to the United States on a number of different levels.
Thanks, Dustin. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. We've got a lot of great questions in the chat, you guys. So there are two questions. First, one of them is actually very simple, and I think Kathy could probably answer it. How would ACC2 affect farm work, the transport of goods and industrial equipment? And then the other question, which I think is really important, and I don't know that we've touched on it as well as we need to, is what are automakers saying about this this policy, and where are they on it? Are they on board? What commitments have they made, and how does this policy help them stand by those commitments?
Thanks, Molly. Yes, so this regulation is only on passenger cars and trucks. So the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation does not affect any off-road vehicles, such as farm equipment or any medium or heavy duty vehicles. It's really a regulation on anything under about 14,000 pounds. So farm equipment or any of those pieces are not affected by this regulation. And to your second question regarding where auto manufacturers are in this regulation, when Advanced Clean Cars 2 was getting adopted in California, there were no auto manufacturers that came out against this regulation. And I will, as Dustin reiterated in one of his slides, the auto industry has already committed over $210 billion just in the United States to help to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles. So they're providing investments already here in the US. And additionally, many of the companies already actually have targets to fully electrify their fleets within the next 5 to 10 to 15 years already. So what ACC2 does is it really helps to ensure that Delaware is one of those states that is going to get those cars first and ensure that there is that smooth transitioned adoption of this technology that, as Dustin we know is coming.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to respond to those questions generally before I jump? And I also want to be mindful of time. Dustin, how many do you think we can sneak in here? And I will pick the top two. And I also want to say, and check in with you, Dustin, very quickly. Anyone who is registered for this webinar, are you planning, can you email everyone the link to testify? And a little roundup of what we discussed tonight after the fact. We've got some questions about links for the public comment and the hearing and things like that. So I just want to check in and see what your plan is for afterwards.
Absolutely, yes. So as I said previously, we are recording tonight, and so I might not have the recording uploaded online where I can email it out. You have to put it in YouTube or something to host the video. But we'll certainly follow up with links and any important information on how to engage on this issue. I do see a couple questions I can probably answer pretty quick. So because I've had to answer them several times for various crowds. So is the EV infrastructure money for charging stations tied to the state's adoption of ACC2? No. There are competitive grants in the IRA, but there are also formula funding opportunities in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we would just have to basically apply and accept for the formula funding. And then the IRA, we would apply for that money. Now, that being said, states that are further along in development certainly have a leg up in terms of those more competitive grants. So kind of a mixed bag there, but nothing's tied, like if you don't adopt this program, you don't get this money. But I will also point out, because I see a couple of questions about funding, it shouldn't just be public funding, right? It's important that we help, that the public, this is a societal benefit. And so it's important that we do what we can to help folks make this transition in as least painful way as possible. But the states that adopt these programs get a lot more funding than states that don't in terms of private investment. And so it doesn't have to be that it's all public dollars, tax dollars, Reggie funds, whatever the case may be. We can absolutely encourage private investment if we join into this program. So just want to stress that. There's a couple questions about solar, it looks like. In terms of installing solar specifically to charge vehicles, I'm not aware of any plans along those lines. There's a lot of conversation around solar right now throughout the region, but here in Delaware as well. The energy stakeholders group that Senator Hansen runs routinely talks about solar, and the issues therein. The community solar program that we just passed, we're hoping to make sure that those kind of urban built solar projects are readily available and easy to install and affordable to install. So there's kind of some limitations on where you install larger solar systems, but it's issues that we're actively working on with Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Dustin. I want to ask, actually, I think this is a good one for Angela. There is a question about the process for adoption. How does Delaware adopt the Advanced Clean Car 2 standards? So I want to make sure that you have a moment to clearly articulate that, the timing, etc. I know the hearing is already scheduled, but this one's for you, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Advanced Clean Car 2 is a set of regulations. The Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, as an agency of the state of Delaware, has the authority to go through rulemaking processes to adopt regulations. And that is what we're doing with Advanced Clean Car 2. We are sort of in the middle of the rulemaking process right now. So as Molly said, the hearing has been scheduled for April 26th. It is on the public calendar and the link was in the last slide. So if you're interested, you can attend the public hearing. You can also submit comments. And the public hearing webpage has the information for how to submit comments into the record for the hearing. And you can also register if you would like to offer verbal comments at the hearing. So after the hearing, we are required to keep the comment period open for at least 15 days. We're looking at keeping this comment period open for 30 days after the hearing to make sure that people have ample time to comment on the information that they hear, especially if they attend the hearing. It's good to have the time to digest what you've heard and then think about your comments. Following that, the department writes a technical response memo addressing the comments. And then we have an internal process where we submit our technical response memo to the hearing officer, who prepares materials for the secretary's review. And then the secretary of DNREC will make a decision on whether or not to adopt the regulation at the end of the process. So that's where we are now, and that's what the path forward looks like.
Thank you, Angela, so much. I appreciate that clarification. We have a little bit more time. I want to ask a question that's come up in the Q&A in various ways throughout the event this evening, and I think there are many people here that are qualified to answer it. The question is that how do we make this adoption of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 standards less of a partisan issue? Currently, as we all know, there's been a lot of opposition in the state of Delaware, and we want to make sure that the information gets out to the general public. So how do you guys advise, people on the street who are in support of these standards and others, to discuss this in a nonpartisan way? We all breathe air and live on the planet. So I'm going to just leave that one open and see what y'all think.
Yeah, Molly, I think you said what I was going to say. We all breathe air and we all need a livable planet. And, while people may disagree on how we can improve air quality, all Delawareans have to work together towards a common goal to protect public health and the environment. And I'll also just reiterate that this regulation, as Dustin mentioned, it is a bipartisan regulation, and it has had support from both Democratic and Republican governors. So it should not be a partisan issue. Again, clean air should not be a partisan issue, and we should all be working to improve air quality in any way that we can.
Yeah, I think, one way of talking about this with folks is, you always try to meet folks where they're at, right? So, I said we're not here to debate about climate change, and folks don't have to do that. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to adopt this program, not least of which is we know this transition is coming and we have to plan for it. That's not an option. We can't not do that. We have to do that. The best way to plan and ease into this is through a gradual transition. So I think for most folks, they don't want Delaware to fall behind and then have to play catch up. I just kind of firmly believe that folks would much rather the state take a managed approach to this transition that we know is happening, and making sure that we're using tax dollars wisely and that we're leveraging private investments in the state. And so, I know there's a lot of rhetoric around this, that this is a ban on cars, or that folks are going to get their cars taken away, or they can't keep their cars, or some other such thing, or you're going to be forced to buy an EV. I know there's a lot of rhetoric out there around that. Most of it is not reflected in reality. And I think we need to talk about and be grounded in the reality of the situation. And that is that this is happening, and Delaware has to do what it can to prepare and make sure it is doing so in an equitable way.
Thanks, Dustin. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, Rep. Phillips and Rep. Lambert. We do have 2 Delaware state representatives on this panel tonight, so I want to give you guys the opportunity to address that question if you're able to and if you'd like to. Rep. Lambert, I see you raised your hand.
Thank you, Molly. In regards to bipartisan support for some of these bills, for the direction we're going in with the advanced cars program. I think that there is an opportunity to get bipartisan support. There is such a significant amount of misinformation out there, but our Republican colleagues in the General Assembly, not only are they intelligent, but they're always willing to listen. I've already had conversations with a couple of my counterparts about some of these bills. So opportunities like this, we just want to thank everyone for coming together, can definitely help us to bridge some of these gaps.
And I think too, talking to Republican colleagues about the equity part of this, I know both of my bills address low income buyers. They get behind that because they understand that EVs right now are pretty expensive and we want to make sure that they're accessible. So I think, understanding where your colleagues are and, like Dustin said, meeting them where they are is incredibly important. And I like to use, social media as a platform to make sure we're getting out the proper information so we can push that to our constituents. We can bring that up during community meetings and try and get the proper information out that is tackling all the misinformation that's coming out right now.
Thank you so much. There are a couple, pivoting a little bit away from the politics of this. There are a couple questions that are in the chat about sort of the technology around EVs. So I'm wondering, Dr. Kempton, if you can give us a little bit of information about the average lifespan of a current EV battery, how much it weighs, just some really just general good technical information about EVs and the way they work would be great. You're on mute, Dr. Kempton.
Willett, you're muted.
Thanks. Dangerous to ask me that question because I could go all night. Yeah, so the battery, EV batteries, they're, as Kathy mentioned, they're getting more efficient. So they're actually less weight for the amount of miles that you can drive. They're measured in kilowatt hours. That's how much electricity you can store, how much energy you can store. But, the really practical way to measure them is how many miles they'll take your car before you need to recharge. So we started out early with vehicles, commercial vehicles that would get 60 or 70 miles. And now it's pretty common to be able to buy a little bit more expensive vehicle, say mid cost, which would be around 300 to 400 miles. And there are extreme, they're really high cost, but you can get a vehicle that goes, 500 plus miles today. So how big is the battery depends on how far you want to drive. And one thing that we've studied recently is what is the average amount of distance that people have to drive. And the figure you always hear is the average US driving per day is 30 miles or 32 miles, but that doesn't really tell you anything. You need to know sort of how much is the maximum that somebody will drive in a year, because they don't want to be switching around vehicles so much. So the kind of size of a battery that would meet, a third or a half of the population is only, 150 mile battery. You might 1 or 2 days a year, you might need to swap a vehicle or stop and charge or something. But and so the weights that we're talking about that go along with the miles, it's it's the heaviest part of the vehicle. Kind of in value, you think of it as the engine and the transmission, instead of thinking of it like the 12-volt battery that starts up a combustion car. And so you might be looking at just roughly 500 pounds, maybe substantially more. And the automakers have figured out now that they want to put that low on the vehicle under the floor, which means it's better for handling. It used to be they just put it wherever they had extra space. So to lifetime, I didn't touch on that. Basically, all the OEMs, all the automakers are guaranteeing the batteries for 8 years or 80,000 miles or 100,000 miles or whatever. So it's the same as they always used to warranty the drivetrain. And what does that warranty mean? It means that it doesn't go below something like 80%. So people talk about the battery wears out. It's really not like a flashlight battery because the car is managing the battery pretty well, much better than the computer does, actually. So what will happen is you lose life gradually. So, if you plan to keep your car for 10 years, then buy it with maybe 20 or 25% more miles of range than you actually need at the end of that time. And lead acid drops off and it just goes boom, and it goes to zero. You can't start your car if you've got an old starter battery in it. But lithium has a very different lifetime characteristic. It gets to around 70% life and it just stays there for years. So actually, EV batteries mostly don't wear out. You get to down like 25, 30% less life, and it's going to be like that for a really long time, unless there's some unusual circumstance. So a little bit complicated answer, but I tried to answer what the questions you asked.
Thanks, Dr. Kempton. There's a little bit of a follow-up, and this is something that I have seen come up, and I'm sure all of you have heard it come up, about questions and objections to electric vehicles in regard to safety and battery fires. Now, we know gas-powered cars to the tune of 100,000 or so a year, gas-powered cars catch fire. So what is that comparison in terms of safety and fires with electric vehicles and battery fires?
I don't know the numbers, someone else on the line may, but there are per vehicle or per 100,000 miles driven, there are far more gasoline fires than lithium fires in lithium ion batteries. And of course, a lot of what we're talking about is lithium chemistries in the battery. 10 years from now, we may not be using lithium in EV batteries. That's as was mentioned briefly, that's a very active area of research. Lithium is pretty good. It's a pretty good atom for making batteries, but there's other stuff too. There's a sodium-based battery. There's iron air that's probably too heavy. All these have different chemistries, and there's a lot of science being done on batteries. So some of those are going to turn out really cool batteries that are just too heavy, but they're good for grid storage. There's a water iron battery, which sounds totally weird. How do you make a battery that does stuff with water and iron? And there's a sodium-based battery, which may be a good vehicle battery, because a vehicle battery has to be light, obviously, has to be able to charge and discharge quickly. So I'm not sure if I answered the question.
No, that was great. That was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Kempton. It is something that's been coming up a lot, so I think it's an important question to make sure that we answer. There is another question about long-term affordability of EVs for middle and low income folks. I know we've talked a little bit about new EVs and opening up the used EV market. Does anyone want to put a fine point on that question about affordability and cost parity, if possible, or when that might happen with electric vehicles versus internal combustion engine vehicles?
Yeah, so I can take an initial stab at this. As Dr. Kempton mentioned, battery efficiency is coming down, but also battery prices are coming down, and that is the most expensive part of a vehicle. So we've been seeing vehicles achieve more and more, closing the gap between a comparable gasoline vehicle and an electric vehicle continuously over the years. And I've been seeing articles too about even some EV companies slashing prices for their electric vehicles because some of those prices have decreased more rapidly than they were expecting. So I don't have an exact day of when we'll achieve price parity, but I do also want to reiterate that even today, an electric vehicle is more affordable to own and operate than its gasoline counterpart. And that's in part due to the fueling costs being significantly lower than a gasoline vehicle, and also the maintenance costs, because maintenance is significantly less than a gasoline vehicle because you have fewer parts. So we know that transportation costs can tend to be one of the largest energy burdens for drivers and for households. And so by helping to reduce the transportation costs of low and moderate income community members through the purchase of an electric vehicle, it'll overall help to relieve that energy burden that they might feel. And as Representative Phillips reiterated in her opening remarks again, we're seeing incentive programs coming out to help reduce that gap again between the gasoline and electric vehicles. And we're continuing to see additional incentives for used vehicles too. So in addition to the prices naturally coming down over time, we're also seeing these incentives to help with that gap that might exist today.
I was just going to add that in addition, the ACC2 regulations do contain provisions that provide incentives to car manufacturers for participating in programs to make the vehicles more accessible to at-risk communities or lower income communities in terms of the meeting their goals in the regulation and getting more credit for making the vehicles more accessible.
Thanks so much, you guys. I am gonna, we haven't gotten to every question. I hope that we've given you guys all some broad brush strokes and some good details for you to take away this evening. We are coming up on time. I do want to give everyone the opportunity on the panel for any last comments or thoughts. Dr. Greenglass, you haven't said much since you gave all that amazing health data in the beginning of the conversation this evening. So I wanted to start with you and see if you had any last thoughts for us, and then I'll let the others panelists jump in so we can wrap up.
Sure, thanks. Going back to the question about the partisan divide, my approach is really talk about the things that we all could agree on, and that is health. As Dustin and I mentioned, there are a whole lot of asthmatics in the country and in the state. Delaware has the second highest prevalence of pediatric asthma in the country. So we have a lot of kids, no matter what caused it, we have a lot of kids with asthma. And it's really irrefutable that polluted air makes those kids sicker and makes them miss school, need more medications, spend more time at the doctors. And it's been shown that helping those kids be healthier by letting them have a better indoor and outdoor air quality, there's a whole lot of savings involved, and they get to spend more time in school and be more and learn better. So I think look at the things that we can all agree on: the health of our children and grandchildren and of our neighbors, the ability to create jobs in our community, the ability to make transportation costs more affordable in our community. And I think we have to agree that this is happening. And the question is not, can we stop it or not, but can Delaware take the fullest advantage of it? The number of electric vehicles per population in New Jersey and Maryland already 2 to 3 times the number per population in Delaware. And until we let the car manufacturers know that we're going to be participating, the cars will continue going where they can sell them now. So I think we can agree on it's better to get involved now, to learn and to build the infrastructure now. It's better for the health of Delawareans. Even next year, if we have more EVs on the road this year, there'll be fewer kids with asthma and adults with asthma attacks, people missing school and work, and the human and I think and financial cost. I think we can all agree to those things. And just think of the other great changes in public health in the last 50 years. Smoking, so many fewer people smoke now, right? Let's just look at that one. Seatbelts, remember the fight against seatbelts will take away my freedom. Well, we killed fewer people in cars because of seatbelts. We killed many fewer people with lung disease and heart disease and stroke because there's less smoking. The number today I saw, 16% of Delawareans adults smoke now, 1/6. That number was 45% 30 years ago. The change has made us better. And that's not a partisan issue. Some people try to make it that, but when people learn the facts, when they saw that they could get by without smoking, or they could get by using seatbelts, then it happened. And I think those are the things we need to focus on, what we all need and want in our lives and our communities.
Thank you, Doctor. Does anybody else have any final comments, thoughts, bits of information they want to share before we wrap up? And Dustin, you can do the final closing once everyone's had their moment. Dr. Kempton.
Well, there were a question or two about electricity supply, and I just wanted to mention that, we have mostly power plants that burn fuel, so you get pollution that way. But EVs are really efficient, so about 80% of the electricity goes to driving the car. So there is some pollution right now, but we have rapid growth of solar and wind in the region and overall in the world, really. And Delaware has an opportunity to continue the growth that we have a bit more each year in solar. And also, since we're a coastal state, we have the opportunity to do large chunks of new clean generation with offshore wind. I hope we'll see a bill in the legislature this year. Representatives Phillips and Lambert, you may see me more talking about a different clean energy subject in Legislative Hall, but that one offshore wind project gets you 28 or 30% of the electricity taken off fossil fuels, and it's almost completely clean. You use a little bit of energy to build the turbines and stuff. But so when you buy an electric car today, it's got a certain amount of pollution that you can attribute back to the power plant. But as states, and hopefully including Delaware, make these big movements into much more clean energy, your car actually gets cleaner. Your car's actually polluting less, even though it's the same car, because of where the electricity is coming from. So there's that interesting synergy between these two different trends for clean energy. That's all.
Thanks, Doctor. If no one else has any final remarks, we can let Dustin close us out, and thank you all so much for coming this evening. Dustin.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll start out by saying we get a lot of questions all the time via email. Folks are welcome to email me through the sierraclub.org/Delaware website, but we have now created a landing page with the most common questions that we get and our responses to them. So if you go to our website, sierraclub.org/Delaware, there is a link that's for our active campaigns. Under that, you'll see one for clean transportation for all. And there's the frequently asked questions for the advanced clean cars in that tab. I'll include that in the follow-up email tonight. But I do want to touch on a few things. Folks have been asking kind of why the opposition. Look, there's a subset of our population that is very focused on limited government and small government, however you want to phrase that. And that includes no regulations, no mandates, none of that sort of stuff, right? And so there's inherently going to be opposition anytime you have government doing anything, because that's ideological differences. But regardless of whether or not you like this regulation exists, right? This program exists. States around the country are utilizing this program. So you can say, I don't like it, and that's fine. But the fact is, all the states around us are using it, and they're getting prioritized with these investments in these vehicles and access to the more affordable EVs that we are not getting here in Delaware. So it's okay if you don't like the program. I'm not here to I am actually here to try and convince you to like it. But even setting that aside, that ideological difference aside, the program exists, and Delaware, it behooves Delaware to participate, right? To get those investments, to get that access to these cars as car manufacturers continue to ramp up their transition to these vehicles. I do want to touch on two things that come up in kind of every meeting that we do. I know we're already a little bit over time, and again, they're on the FAQs. Gas tax comes up all the time, and buying gas and repair shops come up all the time. The simple fact is, for better or worse, internal combustion or gas powered cars, however you want to put it, will be the predominant vehicle on the road for quite some time. Well past when this regulation is in full effect in 2035, right? So the kind of myth out there that all the gas stations are going to go away, or we're going to ban gas stations, I guess, I heard that at a town hall the other night. It's just not, again, it's not reflective of reality. People will need to buy gas even after this goes into effect, and the gas cars have been, continuing to transition out off of the road, because we'll still have plug-in hybrids, which still require gas. We'll still have farm vehicles. We'll still have other things that have nothing to do with this regulation. And so repair shops, gas shops, or gas stations will be, in our lives for quite some time to come. There will probably not be a time in my life that there's not a gas station around me. So I hear the fear. It's just not going to be how reality pans out. On the gas tax, this is a very kind of novel issue right now, because the percentage of folks that we're talking about is very small. States around the country are having conversations around kind of how do we fund our roads? Is the gas tax the right way to go about it? The gas tax is highly inequitable as it is right now, right? Because who buys the most gas? Those with the least fuel efficient vehicles, who tend to be lower income families, right? So it's already inequitable. So the solution we have to come up with has to have equity baked in. There's a number of different ways to go about that. We're having those conversations now, but it is a highly surmountable problem. That's not going to be the issue at the end of the day. I promise you, we can figure that out. So one example is just having a mileage assessment when you go to renew your registration. If you have an EV, to have some sort of equivalent pay that you would have paid at the pump, you would pay the state during your registration process, that equivalent amount, right? So there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about that, and states across the nation are having that conversation. But we're going to have some time, right, to kind of adjust and make those changes over time. So really, at the end of the day, there are issues in any transition. There are issues of how we're going to do things, what that's going to look like. But the simple fact is, we're going to have to solve these problems. We're going to have to work through these issues, because this transition is happening. The question is, how rapidly in Delaware do we have to make this transition versus how gradually we can make it? And how can we grow the used market in Delaware and the new market, but particularly the used market, since that's where most folks buy their cars. It's going to take a very, very, very long time to grow that used marketplace if we're not participating in this and getting the new cars on the road to become tomorrow's used cars. So there's, again, a lot of reasons why somebody would want to be supportive of this. I understand there's a couple reasons, I don't like government in anything, right? Those kind of reasons. I hear you, but setting that aside, there's a lot of positive things that can come out of this program for Delaware. And so I would encourage folks, check out our website, check out the FAQs. You can email questions anytime. And we'll have more opportunities to engage. We won't maybe tap all of our panelists here again that we have here tonight. But I do really appreciate everybody that's came out to listen to this side of things. I went to one of the town halls that are being organized in opposition to this program, and I tried to take as many notes as possible to make sure we could answer those same questions tonight. Hopefully we got to the vast majority of them. But I encourage folks to really think about what kind of future you want to see in Delaware, right? Is it one where we have a managed transition, where we have the ability to leverage private investment, where we have cars that are affordable and being accessible to the people who need them the most? Or do we want to have to continue to play catch up and be the first state only in that one thing that we did the first time? We could be a leader in the region if we join in with these states around us and move forward on this process. And so I encourage folks to think about how they would like to see Delaware handle this, kind of haphazardly, or do we want to handle in a planned and measured way? And that's really, what we were here to talk about. So really want to hats off and thank you to Molly for helping moderate the questions and answers. And thank you to all our panelists who came out and were willing to, speak up and answer questions on this. So again, if kind of regardless of how you feel about the program, you can submit comments to DENREC. There's a public hearing on April 26th where you can come, maybe learn a little bit more, and certainly provide comment in that virtual space as well. And we encourage folks, whether you agree with us or not, it is your opportunity to make your voice heard.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.